Why should we care about invasive species? What makes them so bad for native wildlife? Well, some invasive species kill off native animals by directly eating them. Some outcompete natives for resources like food or habitat, while others simply change the environment in a way that makes it hard for natives to survive. It's clear that these species can have a huge negative impact. But ecology is a complex web of interactions. So it's not always easy to predict what will happen when a non-native species arrives in an ecosystem. Sometimes surprises happen. Take, for example, brown tree snakes on Guam. These snakes are thought to have arrived on the island in the 1940s, hitching a ride on military planes that flew over from the Philippines. There, they found plenty of new prey items and few predators of their own. This allowed their population to explode, and they quickly became one of the island's worst invasive species. They were responsible for the extinction of 9 native species and are believed to be the cause of several more going missing. And if that wasn't bad enough, they also caused around 100 million US dollars worth of damage to the local economy by decimating crops and getting into electrical infrastructure. Now, in recent years, scientists have been working on ways to control this problem. One team wanted to figure out if there was a type of native predator that could keep the snake numbers down without introducing another non-native species to the island. They did this by bringing in 16 of Guam's most voracious predators, including birds, lizards, and even cockroaches. They then observed how much they ate over a 4-day period. While most of the predators only ate a small number of snakes, 2 birds really stood out. The first was the yellow-throated warbler, which ate an average of 37 snakes per day. Not bad for a bird that weighs less than 2 ounces. The second was the gray-backed white-eye, which ate an average of 23 snakes per day. While both of these birds are already on Guam, they were not found in the southern part of the island where the brown tree snake is mostly a problem. The researchers suggested that these birds could be introduced to the south in order to help control the snake numbers there. But despite this promising research, no such program has yet been implemented. Controlling invasive species can be tricky, but it is possible. That's why it's important to study how invasive species interact with native wildlife. That way we can get a better idea of how these introductions might play out before they happen. And that's exactly what a paper published last week in the journal Ecology did. The authors studied an invasive fish called the rainbow trout in a stream in its native range in the western United States. Rainbow trout were introduced to this stream in the early 1980s, but within just a few years, it was found that they had completely replaced the native speckled dace. The researchers wanted to know what led to this dramatic outcome. Was it something about the trout or something about the trout's habitat? In order to find out, they conducted experiments using artificial streams in the laboratory. Each stream contained a headwater pool followed by a riffle area and a pool at the end, all connected by a pipe. These were stocked with either only trout, only dace, or both species together. Half of the experimental streams also had rocks placed in them that provided hiding places for the fish. In the other half, there were no hiding places. As it turned out, the trout were bullies. They aggressively chased the dace into the headwater pool, preventing them from accessing the rest of the stream. When there were no hiding places, the dace were easy targets and almost all of them were killed. Even when the researchers tried to make things fairer by putting equal numbers of each species in the streams, the outcome was the same. The presence of hiding places helped the dace survive, but they still did worse in mixed species streams than they did on their own. The trout actively chased the dace away from the best feeding and breeding habitat, successfully outcompeting them for resources. This suggests that even if we could remove all of the trout from the Wildcat Creek, the habitat would be so altered by their presence that it wouldn't be suitable for the speckled dace to return. To restore the stream to its native state, we would need to remove the rainbow trout and then undertake extensive habitat restoration as well. This is not easy to do, especially in the case of streams, rivers, and other flowing waters, which are notoriously difficult to restore. And while we can't turn back the clock and undo the impacts of invasive species, this study does show us what to look out for in the future. If a fish species is outcompeting its native counterparts, it may be worth checking if it's doing the same thing elsewhere. But not all invasive species arrive in an ecosystem by accident. Some are intentionally released with the hope that they will control populations of other non-native species. This is exactly what happened with the cane toad. Cane toads are native to North and South America and were first introduced into the sugar industry in Hawaii in 1859. Their numbers exploded and soon they were seen as a pest, which is when the decision was made to move them to Australia. Here they would supposedly feast on the beetles that were destroying Queensland's sugar crops. But the cane toad's appetite was not limited to beetles. They're generalist predators, and they happily ate anything they could catch, including native species. Over time, this had a devastating impact on Australian biodiversity. The cane toad is toxic to most native predators, which meant that it escaped many of its natural enemies. It also reproduced like crazy, releasing a chemical into the water that inhibits the growth of native tadpoles. And to top it off, it's not picky about its diet. The result of all this is that it's gone from a pest to a plague. Today, cane toads are considered one of the world's worst invasive species. And just like the brown tree snake, they've been here for decades. So what can we do about them now? Well, as it turns out, there is a native Australian predator that's happy to eat cane toads, the eastern barred bandicoot. This marsupial has specialized jaws and claws that allow it to dig through the tough outer skin of the toad and into its tasty insides. Other digging bandicoots have been shown to decline in areas with cane toads, but this one seemed immune to their toxic effects. A paper published in 2016 showed that these bandicoots could help control cane toad numbers. And a follow-up paper published in 2023 went a step further. By combining field observations with lab experiments, this team wanted to understand exactly how these bandicoots affected the toads. They found that a single bandicoot could eat up to 2,000 toads a year, which is a lot of pressure on the toad population. But they didn't stop there. They also looked at the impact of the bandicoots on the toad eggs and tadpoles, finding that while they preferred to eat the eggs, they would tackle tadpoles if they had to. Altogether, their results suggest that eastern barred bandicoots could potentially save Australia's biodiversity by keeping cane toad numbers low. And indeed, there is some evidence that this is already happening. Where the bandicoot is found, there are fewer cane toads. So it looks like this introduction has been a success story. But not all predators have such a straightforward relationship with invasive species. A paper published this April tells the story of the American mink. This non-native mustelid was introduced into Britain in the late 19th century, and it quickly became a problem for native wildlife. It eats pretty much anything it comes across, including endangered species like the red squirtle and the European pond turtle. Because of this, American mink have been trapped in cold in Britain since the 1930s, but it is hard to get rid of them because they are efficient predators and don't have too many enemies of their own. It's thought that American mink populations may be kept under control by one of their main predators, the Eurasian otter. In 2009, otters were reintroduced to an area of England where they had been hunted to extinction. But surveys carried out in 2017 found that the mink numbers were still high, suggesting that the otters weren't having an impact. A new study published this April revisited this question using camera traps and underwater cameras. As it turns out, the Eurasian otter does target the American mink. Otters were recorded killing American mink on land and in the water. And they didn't seem to avoid mink burrows, even though these are dangerous places for any predator to enter. Despite this, American mink numbers were still high, suggesting that something else was going on. When the researchers analyzed the otter scats they collected, they found that while they did eat mink, they were mostly eating fish. This is good news for the otters, but bad news for the mink, because not only is the otter eating them, but they're also competing with them for food. The researchers concluded that the American manx population would likely continue to increase until the otters switched to a more carnivorous diet. In other words, the otter's choice of meal is influencing the outcome of this invasion. These 4 papers show that the outcomes of introductions can be more complex than we think. Invasive species can affect more than just the obvious target species. They can shape entire communities, changing what other species thrive. As humans, we can't undo introductions that have already happened, but learning from them can help protect ecosystems from future invasions. Whether it's by understanding what makes an invasive species successful, or by exploring how native species can help us restore balance to invaded ecosystems, science can help us keep our ecosystems thriving.